All right, welcome to the State Network Podcast. I'm Jim Sparks. I'm here with Megan Villalpando.
Hey, guys.
Abraham Guevara.
How's it going?
And today's guest is officially our most frequent guest.
Is that right?
That's with your second visit.
Wow.
You are our most frequent guest. Commissioner Kenneth G. Hodder.
What a delight to be here. Thank you, Jim.
We're so excited to hear. Well, maybe you become a regular. I think when you hit the third one, then you become a regular instead of just special guest.
All right. Sounds great.
Commissioner Hodder has been with us a few years now. Commissioner for 3 years? Are you third year now?
You're coming up to the end of the third year now. That's right.
Oh, yeah. You were a mid-season transfer.
A mid-season transfer.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's right.
Mid-season for a draft choice to be named later.
Yeah.
That's right.
And they haven't named it. That's how big it is.
Yeah, it'll be 3 years.
Maybe it's your sister. I don't know.
Oh, a cadet?
Yeah. Well, you always want a future prospect.
That's exactly right.
Ultimately.
Exactly right. Yes. Well, 3 years at the end of 2019. That's right.
Yeah. So, and he's had many leadership appointments across the globe, IHQ, Kenya. Anything I miss on the other side of the world?
Two tours of Kenya, right?
2 tours in Kenya.
That's right.
Yeah, and our tour at London involved a lot of international travel, so seeing a lot of the world, seeing the Army in a lot of different contexts.
That's really cool. How many different color uniforms do you own, or have you owned?
4.
4. Have you done?
Currently have 4.
Did you do the tan one?
No, I never did the tan one.
That one's interesting to me.
It's a fascinating one. Yeah,
It's a little butterscotchy, but so white, gray,
white,
blue?
yeah, white, gray, and 2 types of blue. Yes,
Got it. All right. Amongst his accomplishments, he is a graduate of Harvard. Was it weird to be there?
Weird in what sense?
Well, I don't know. When you grow up, you're thinking everyone always talks about Harvard or Yale as these prestigious, and they are prestigious universities. But did that kind of wear off, or was it just school?
Oh, it was just school. After a while, I was conscious of the privilege it was to attend Harvard. But yes, it was just the day-to-day activities that you would have at any university.
That's cool. You didn't have to wear weird coats and.
No.
That's what the movies. The movies always portray that.
It's not Hogwarts, Jim.
Well, I know.
Yeah, that's right.
That's how the movies always portray it. I haven't been to Harvard yet. I don't think they must not have gotten my application. I never heard from them at all. But it could have been my 2.8 GPA may have stopped that. But pass the bar. What state did you pass the bar?
In California.
In California.
Yes.
And are you undefeated in the courtroom?
Yes. I am
technically
undefeated in the courtroom.
And you have had to relearn how to change diapers.
Oh, I tell you, now you've opened up a topic that is of great significance to me. To be a grandfather is the greatest joy of my life.
Are you willing to admit that you and Jolene have completely different set of rules as grandparents than you did as parents?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. My question is, what rules?
Yeah, exactly. You wind them up and go home.
That's exactly right. I am in charge of all ice cream.
Oh, there you go.
That's right. Regardless of what mom has said will be involved in terms of dinner or other times during the day, ice cream is on the agenda when grandpa's around.
What's your number one ice cream?
Oh, banana splits.
Banana
splits. That's his favorite.
Okay.
So we get a banana split every time I see him.
Oh, wow.
So all the sugar starts to flow through his veins, and then it's time for me to go home.
That's pretty awesome. Well, before we get into the episode, Abraham's got something to share with us, youth culture related, perhaps this time?
Yeah, youth culture-ish.
You did it.
We're closer this time.
Good job.
So I was reading this article in the BBC. Makes me feel smart.
A reputable source.
This is the headline of the article is "Flight Shame could have growth in air traffic." So basically saying that this whole supposed movement of flight shaming can halve the traffic and the amount of businesses that a lot of flights or a lot of airlines are going to get. And a lot of this is sort of being triggered by Greta Thunberg, who spoke in front of the UN, was it? It was in front of the UN, right? And so basically this whole idea of trying to, I guess, I don't know, for lack of a better way of putting it, maybe negatively encourage people to fly less. And one person in this article was quoted in saying that I'm taking a 24-hour train journey to avoid flying because this whole idea of it potentially affecting the environment and all these other issues. And people may or may not agree with all of it. But basically the reason I'm bringing this up is because I feel like it kind of goes into what we're going to be talking about a little bit. But do you guys think that shaming, because there's all kinds of shaming, right? That this is all this sort of thing that's going on online. But do you guys think that shaming, whether for positive, even if it's for a positive cause or whatever, do you think that's a good way to affect change, even if it's a positive change? And I feel like this question is something that I think youth leaders will deal with because this stuff kind of goes right into the depth of youth culture nowadays. Nowadays, if kids want something to happen, they'll hashtag it or they'll talk about it. And if it's something that they're against, they'll call it out. Kids will take a picture of cell phone of somebody doing something that is negative or whatever, and they'll post it and they'll say, "Look at this person, look what they're doing." Whether it might be a good thing, maybe they're encouraging something good, like I'm saying. But is this an effective way? Is this a good way? How do we feel about this? How do you guys feel about this? Whether it's, I just want to hear your thoughts.
I think that might elicit a possible change, but not.
So is it even effective?
Not true change. Like I think you're like, oh yeah, no, I'll get on board with that, and then like you forget it real quick. I mean, how many people protest things and stay with it?
Right.
Very few. And so I think that might get at least someone talking. So I don't know if that's a bad thing. Like it gets a conversation going.
Right.
But true change, I think it's hard to truly change on shame.
Shame change?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just off the top of my head. I mean, I'm sure there might be examples otherwise, but
do you think people just will feel the shame going around and then they just kind of lay low for a little bit?
Well, as I'm thinking about it a little bit more, I'm wondering if that shame, unless it's absolutely personal to them, like
right.
if someone made fun of my jeans in high school,
right?
I'm not wearing those jeans again.
Right.
I'm just not going to wear them again. I will make a forever change.
Right.
But that's out of insecurity and probably a desire to fit in.
Right.
But I think unless it affects you on that personal level, I don't know if shame would bring great change.
Right. This is also a similar example was a few years back here in California. They were doing like water shaming because people were like, we had a drought, right? And people were like, still watering their lawns, and so people were calling them out to get them to, But I don't know. What are your thoughts on this?
I don't know. I tend to think that if there's a difference between shaming and awareness. And I tend to gravitate or prefer awareness and let people make up their mind for themselves. So I think it's good to there's other ways to bring about awareness about the environment or the drought, the former drought. Are we even still in a drought? I don't know. Technically, I think we're out of the drought in California, but
we're still getting charged taxes for it.
Yes. But yeah, I tend to think that it makes more sense to me, I guess, just to bring awareness about the idea or whatever the issue is and let people kind of process that and respond to that how they feel they should or should not respond to that, rather than kind of guilt tripping people or shaming them or making them feel bad for doing something. I guess just in life in general, I've just never been a fan of that. So.
Right. I don't know if I would react positively towards someone shaming me for something like that. I don't know if I'd be like, oh, you know what? You're right. Maybe I might react negatively.
It kind of makes me want to do the opposite.
Kind of. Maybe just to spite somebody. I don't know. Maybe that's what might happen. But in this article, it is saying that people are trying to reduce their, like, it's working, at least, from the get-go.
Yeah, I think with Greta's situation, I think it's a fine line, though, of she's raising awareness rather than shaming.
Right.
And so you might consider that she's shaming, but I might consider that she's just raising good points that are directed directly at you.
Right. And to be fair,
that's not shaming.
This is not saying she is the one
driving
this.
But like it could be that you're just raising good points and people are taking it as shaming.
Right.
I do feel like, we're still in this extreme
Culture.
right
It's
now.
very
It's
extreme.
like, it's not halfway in between. It's not like, hey, that's an interesting point. It's like, no, wait, I don't agree with you, so I don't agree with all of you.
You're either with us
And
or
that's
against us.
right. And so it's a goofy place to be right now that
It
we're
is.
in, because you have to seemingly choose sides. I don't, but I'm like, forget it.
Right. I think it's very, I think for the kids growing up in this sort of culture, these are our future adults. This is what is going to be in the culture. This is what the kind of behavior or whatever they're going to be used to. So I don't know. I was also wondering, like, what would you guys think for a youth leader? If you're addressing this, if this is going on in your core, in your youth group, how do you?
Yeah, I think again, for me, it's like you could pick and choose. That's okay. Like, hey, that I don't like this part, but I'm okay with this part.
Yeah.
It's not the whole. The other thing is this will pass.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to come to a point where it's so much, and then the pendulum's going to swing, and so you just kind of have to ride it out a little bit of just like, don't take it personally.
Yeah. But Commissioner, is there anything that you maybe thought on this issue?
It's a very interesting question. I think no one can live their life in a constant state of moral outrage. So the notion that we are using this word shame, which would be traditionally applied to an individual's personal moral responsibility to act in a way that is consistent with ethical or moral norms, has now been expanded to apply to societal issues like climate change.
Right.
And without any argument, without any discussion, by virtue of the number of people who are online or who are discussing it, you must feel a sense of moral outrage and shame, personal shame as a consequence of it. I don't think that's a good way for anyone to develop. I don't think it's a good way for anyone to live their life. There has to be reason, there has to be discussion, there should certainly be awareness. But I think, as Jim suggests, people will tire of that. The notion of shaming will lose its efficacy over time because no one can live their life constantly feeling either shamed or constantly shaming others. It's an emotional high that simply won't last.
Yeah. That's really good.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Well, thank you, Abraham. Today's episode, we are talking about criticism, everyone's favorite topic, something we've all received and something we've all probably done. And so, but we're really going to focus on kind of maybe the experience of criticism and how to respond to criticism and kind of various capacities. But everyone remembers their first working criticism. And for me, the harshest criticism I ever received changed the course and how I worked. I was working at camp. I was told that I was not good and I did not follow up on things and I was not organized and I was just hiding behind creating these summer programs. And it was a very harsh criticism, but it was 100% true. And luckily I was in a space at that time to receive it and made sure that no one ever said that to me again. I mean, to my face at least. But and so that piece of criticism altered my working history, so I see criticism as a positive thing. It can be a very positive thing. So, but Commissioner is here and has received criticism, I think, once or twice.
Every leader does.
Yes. So, how do you prepare for criticism?
Well, first of all, let me say I'm so glad that you're raising this issue because your listeners are involved in leadership all the time.
Yep.
They're bringing together groups. They're trying to make them effective. They're trying to impact the communities in which they live. And whenever you put yourself in a position like that, you are going to receive criticism. Criticism is simply a fact of life. As you suggest, it's a fact of life for those who aren't leaders, but it is particularly a feature of leadership in the modern world. And that's simply because of human nature. The church itself is a divine institution created by Christ, but it's also a human institution because it's composed of flawed individuals. So you're going to have criticism. So no good leader is going to be exempt, and you have to make sure that you are prepared for it. I think I also want to, before I address that particular question that you asked, Jim, say a little something about how much more criticism there is today than there used to be. The thing that you mentioned, Abraham, with respect to shaming is certainly a function of this. Criticism today is far more intense and far more pervasive than I think it ever has been. A couple of reasons. Number one is we're living in what people call a postmodern context. So there is less agreement about how you should conduct yourself, what is true and what is right. So people are going to feel far freer, because they come from different perspectives, to criticize the way you act, the way you lead. They're going to be more willing to do that. The second thing I think to keep in mind is that the rate of change in our society now is far faster than it used to be. One study has recently shown that the amount of scientific advancement that will take place in this 100 years of this century will be equivalent to the preceding 20,000 years.
Wow.
It is increasing at an astronomical rate. And in that kind of environment, the tendency for people to criticize what is so yesterday or what you're doing today is going to be far greater. And the third thing, I think, is that the number of forums in which criticism can be offered has multiplied. Criticism can come from every source, from all sides. It's not like just getting a letter in the mail as you used to.
Right.
Now it's online the same day.
Yeah.
And you can start a thread. Somebody starts a thread online which says, "Great job on this. Congratulations. I just wish we'd been able to solve this problem." And then by the end of the thread, they're doing nothing but criticizing what took place during the course of the day. So I think your listeners should be aware of the fact that criticism, which undoubtedly they feel and they react to, is far more common. So how do you prepare for it? Well, you have to prepare for it by recognizing that it's going to happen, that by becoming a leader, you have exposed yourself to it, and that your primary job, therefore, is to learn how to adapt to it. Learn how to take what it is, turn it upside down, turn it inside out, examine it, and ask yourself, is there any truth in what I've just heard? If there is, you act on that, and you ignore the rest.
Interesting. Now, how has your approach changed, or how has it changed from your earlier years in leadership to where you are now in your leadership?
There is no question that it changes over time, because you acquire experience. You learn more about the sources of criticism, so you know that you can listen more to certain sources than you can to others. You also learn that the individuals who are offering the criticism are usually doing so because of their own situation rather than yours. The third thing I think you learn is that it's not intended to be personal. It may be stated in very personal terms, but generally the criticism that you will receive will be based upon what is happening rather than who you are. I think most people, even when they offer criticism, are not intending to make what we would refer to as an ad hominem argument. They don't want to say, you are a bad person.
Right.
They want to say, this is a bad thing. So they might state it incorrectly, but that means that as a leader, learn over time to take yourself out of the equation. Learn to take yourself out. And the last thing I think I'd say is, make sure that the rest of your life is on a solid foundation. Your identity is not made up of the praise or the criticism you receive. Your identity is in Jesus Christ. Your identity is in what He has promised. Your identity is in how your family loves you, how you love your family, the fulfillment you get from following His will. It's not bound up in what someone else says. And if you learn that lesson, you're on your way to doing great things, despite what others might say.
Nice. Is there a specific way you handled or mishandled criticism that had a large impact on how you process criticism now?
Oh, absolutely. I remember one occasion when I was a very young officer, and I felt that I was receiving a lot of criticism. And oddly enough, when you're criticized, you think that everybody is criticizing.
Yeah, it's true.
You imagine, all right, okay, the whole world is against me. And boy, I'm going to stop them. So I remember on one occasion, I stood in front of the group that I was leading, and I said, I know that I've been criticized for A, B, C. Well, let me tell you what the truth is, and let me tell you why the criticism is unjust. It made me feel good for about 5 seconds, and then I regretted it deeply. And I regretted it because I had allowed what I perceived to be criticism to drive my own actions. And that's the wrong thing to do. Far better to recognize that whatever criticism is out there, you probably perceive it as being far greater than it really is. Step back, don't react, but respond. Again, turn it upside down and inside out. And then say, all right, well, now I'm going to go in this direction. But to stand up and to say, this criticism is wrong, is defensive, it's reactive. And I remember on the occasion that it took place for me, it took most people by surprise. They had no idea that I had felt criticized. And then, of course, you're embarrassed because you've raised an issue that was never an issue for them. So you learn over time that it's going to happen, and you respond to it without making any grand pronouncements.
I think sometimes as a leader, you have to make a decision that might involve maybe confidential information that obviously can't be shared with everybody. I always joke that with Service Corps, my least favorite day of the year, it is my least favorite day of the year, I have to call all of the applicants and tell them whether or not they were accepted onto Service Corps, which is great, but I also have to call the applicants who were not accepted, and I have to deliver the message that they were not accepted. And it's my least favorite day of the year because you're going to be disappointing some people, but there's always reasons for that, legitimate reasons as to why, unfortunately, that person can't participate on Service Corps, and I can't always share all of that information with them, and it's kind of hard sometimes to have those conversations, but I'm just wondering, how do you deal with the criticism when maybe your audience can't, you can't share all of the information with them, or maybe you can't say, all of the information that you may have on a particular topic or situation?
Yes. The need for honesty should not ever overcome the need to preserve confidentiality. You always want to be honest, but because the interests of others are at stake, you're often as a leader unable to say precisely why you're making the decision that you are, because the damage would go far beyond the issue that is at hand. So it's not inappropriate at all for a leader to say, well, I understand your question, but unfortunately, I'm not at liberty to explain to you all of the details. I can only tell you that the decision has been made based upon the best information and with the best intentions possible. Now, that won't come to people as being entirely satisfactory, but the leader has to accept that will be the reaction. My experience has been over time, however, that all of that emerges in the fullness of time. If you've made a decision based upon what you think are legitimate, appropriate reasons, then even though you might not share it at that moment, others will see it in the fullness of time. It will all work itself out. There have been many occasions on which I've had to make a decision. I've been unable to explain it all, And yet someone will come up to me months or years later and say, I understand why you had to make that decision. So it will occasion disappointment, but you smile, you're as gracious and kind as you possibly can be, but you recognize that you simply can't, in every case, share it.
I think that kind of speaks to one aspect of being in a leadership position is that you need to do your due diligence and get all of the information before making a decision.
Yes.
I think that's a key part of that you mentioned.
Oh, you do have to get as much information, but I also don't want your listeners to think that they need to get all the information. Someone once said that you should never let adverse facts stand in the way of a good decision. You're never going to have perfect information. Ever. So you will always make a decision based upon what's available to you after you've done your due diligence.
That makes sense.
And the information will never always point in the same direction. It will always be a mixed bag. That is where, for those who follow Jesus Christ, you rely not on your own wisdom, as Paul says, but on divine wisdom. You remember what it says in Micah 6:8, that our responsibility is to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. So I've always felt that as a leader, I need to be as wise as I can, I need to be as kind as I can, and I need to be as helpful as I can. I'm never going to have all the information, but if that's your motivation, then I believe the Lord helps you to make that right decision, even though your own understanding is limited.
There's definitely grace
Preach
for that.
There's great for that, exactly.
Yeah. I was curious, this isn't one of the questions that we've written out, but it came to me is sometimes when you make a decision and it may be a controversial, supposed controversial decision, and someone inevitably is not excited about that decision and then holds that for a long time. And as you travel around and you see that person over and over, how do you approach that? Like, I always struggle with that. It's like, I don't need to be friends with everyone, but I don't want to have an uncomfortableness for the rest of my life around this person because of something I did.
Animosity.
Yeah. That may
Right.
have been a right decision or, I mean, it's the wrong decision. And I know that down the line, I'm always willing to say that I was wrong, but how do you approach that?
I think it's important to remember that as a leader, you have no time for grudges. It just takes too much emotional energy. It takes too much time in terms of your thinking. You just don't have time to worry about how they continue to think about a particular issue. You have to move on. So you have that moment of difficulty. You have that moment of conflict. But after that, you say, let's put it behind us and move on. And then I think I've learned you just forget it. So for the next time you see them, whatever you think they're thinking, you conduct yourself in a way that says there's nothing between us, all is well. And let them react as they will. You simply can't control that. You simply have to say, I, as a leader, can't waste the time on holding on to these things.
Yeah, that's good.
That's awesome. So in that sort of respect, let's say you make a decision as a leader, as a youth leader, and it's a bad decision, or it's all on you, and it's completely kind of, you had all the information, whatever, and you take it. It was your decision, and you feel terrible because you made the mistake.
Right.
How do you not take the criticism personally? How do you avoid taking that?
Always apologize standing up. By that I mean, if you are the one responsible, and I should say it's not just what you've done, Abraham, it's anyone who's been working for you. A leader always shares the credit, but takes full responsibility for any of the actions of their subordinates. Anybody who's been working for you, if they've made a mistake, it's your mistake.
Yeah.
But you always apologize, as Jim, you suggest is important to do, but you apologize standing up.
Yeah.
There's no, I'm a terrible person, I'll never forgive myself. That's not the way a leader responds. A leader will say, I've made a mistake in this instance. I apologize. It will not happen again.
Yeah.
And then again, you forget it and you move on.
It almost sounds like there's a part of being a leader that you have to present to the people, and there's a part you have to present to God. And
there's a part you present to the people.
Right.
There's a part you present to your spouse or to that person who is closest to you.
Yeah.
You must pour out your heart to someone.
Yeah.
And so pouring your heart out to your parent or your mentor or your spouse is an important part of the process, to have a trusted person there. And then you pour it out in prayer. But if you can keep those things separate, you can move on far more quickly than you can otherwise. Otherwise, it'll one context will infect the others, and you will start to get down on yourself, and you'll start to blow it up in your mind. And I don't think that's a healthy way for any leader to function.
Yeah. It reminds me, you said something earlier too that reminded me of that in Samuel where he gets rejected,
Look at Scripture.
Right.
There is not a single leader in Scripture who wasn't criticized.
Right.
Even the most beloved ones,
Right.
David, or
Moses, Abraham, Paul, they're all getting criticism. If you think you're going to work for the gospel of Jesus Christ and not get criticized, forget it. It's simply not going to happen.
Yeah.
How did they respond? How did they deal with it? Moses didn't take the people out into the wilderness, and then the people criticized him for taking them out of Egypt. He didn't say, well, you know what? You've got a point. Let's go back. All right? If you feel that God is leading you in a certain direction, you just keep going, and you keep a smile on your face. You keep your faith in Him. When you make a mistake, you say, I'm sorry, let's move on, but you don't stop.
Yeah. What are the good parts of criticism?
Ooh, criticism can teach you a lot of things. One of my favorite quotes from Winston Churchill is, he said on one occasion, I've received a great deal of criticism, which is fortunate because I've learned so much from it, and I've received so much criticism as a result. So in other words, so he said, look, every time you're criticized, you learn something.
Yeah.
And if you can take all of that and use it to better purposes, all the better. Winston Churchill, if I can go back to him, in World War I, he organized an invasion of the Dardanelles, which was an attempt to change the focus of World War I to a different front. And it was a complete failure through no fault of Churchill's. Nevertheless, the failure of that Dardanelles invasion was a permanent stain upon him for the rest of his life.
Wow.
He talked about it. He had to respond to it. Even in World War II, when he was the hero of the nation, he was constantly responding to this criticism, constantly having to go back on it again and again, and he would explain it, and people would come back, and they would attack him. There's simply those instances in which criticism will always be there, but you've got to learn to move beyond it.
So it sounds like there's a gleaning process that needs to take place when you receive criticism.
Yeah, there is a gleaning process. Yeah. You analyze it, you take it for what it's worth, and then you just have to set aside.
Yeah.
I think in many cases, Abraham, is setting aside the emotion of the issue more than anything else.
Yeah.
Take the fact and use that, but don't worry so much about the bitterness, the anger, the disappointment that accompanies that criticism, because that the issue may stick around, but the emotion, you have to set it aside.
I have more. I have a couple more questions. So, like, do we? Are there certain people that we should be listening more to, or does it work that way?
Absolutely. Yeah. One thing that I'd recommend is that every youth leader who's listening to this or that you work with should always have someone who is watching from the sidelines and can give you honest feedback about where you are. One of the things I learned early in my ministry was whenever I spoke or whenever I preached, I always had someone in the audience who I had asked in advance to watch me, to evaluate me, and then I would always meet with them afterwards. How did it go today? And they would give me their honest impression. For me, I was fortunate in both of our early corps to have retired officers present, and I would take one of them aside and I would say, I'd like you to give me your honest feedback on this. And they would. So having someone who can give you a sounding board is the best thing, I think, for a young leader to keep in mind. It will serve you tremendously. It will also help you understand what you're feeling. I learned early on that what I was feeling about how I had led was usually way off base.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I think I did a terrific job today. Well, there were a couple of problems.
Right.
All right. Or I completely blew it. I should never lead another thing as long as I live. And, well, you did make a couple of points. Another rule of thumb. Take all the praise you receive as a leader and divide by 10. Take all the criticism you receive and multiply by 10.
Yeah.
And that'll give you a rough sense of where you actually stand.
Yeah.
It's a good formula.
That's good.
Let's get to the critical part of you.
Okay.
What are you critical of? Maybe like unnecessarily critical of?
Oh, what am I critical of?
Food, books, hotels, airplanes.
I try not to be critical. I try to step back and to be as kind as I can. But I'd have to say that I'm more critical of books than I am anything else. I love to read, and so I do a lot of reading. So over time, I've become more critical of what I find helpful and what I don't. So I won't finish a book. I used to say, I must read this book. This is a book that I've started, and I must finish every task to which I give myself. But if I'm not enjoying it, 50 or 60 page into it, I'll abandon it. So I've become more critical because I know what I need to draw from it. I think, though, that what you say is a situation in which you're being critical can also be understood as the refinement of one's taste.
Yeah, I guess.
Your movies and your books.
Are you a sommelier?
That's right.
That's it.
Your taste and your understanding of what's going to be helpful. You're able, as you develop as a leader, to see what is going to be worthy of Christ in this, what is going to be worthy of my time. And so you become more critical, not in a negative sense, but in a selective sense.
My list is a lot longer than yours.
What are you critical of,
I'm
Jim?
unusually critical of, it's usually small things that no one cares about, that I can't let go, and it just bothers me.
Small.
It would be like the way
issues.
A baseball player handled a certain play, and I would just be unbelievably critical, and no one would care at all. So, and I'm borderline irrational sometimes. Some of that.
Well, we all have those things.
Yeah. So what are some? You've mentioned, just a wealth of information, but some very practical tips that young leaders can use in how to handle criticism.
Okay, a couple of thoughts on that. Number one, when you're criticized, take a count of 10 before you respond. And that count of 10, if you're in a conversation, you pause. If it's online, you try and wait an hour or two.
Yeah.
Something about the written word.
Which that's right. If it's a letter, you wait overnight. Take a pause. Don't react. Think about your response and then respond intelligently. The first person to lose their temper in an argument loses, regardless of the merit of their position. And as a leader, even if you're wrong on the topic, you will lose more if you lose your temper in the midst of discussing that topic. By contrast, you will gain more as a leader, even if you're wrong on the issue, if you handle yourself in a positive, Christ-honoring, kind, and generous fashion. So, number one is take time. Number two, always remember it's not about you 95% of the time. It's about them, their perspective, perhaps even their relationship with the Lord. Third, take what you can out of every criticism and build better decisions on what you draw from it. And finally, I think the one issue that you mentioned, Abraham, say you're sorry. When you've made a mistake, say you're sorry as quickly as possible, as honestly as possible, and then let it go. Don't allow it to eat at you and at them for a lengthy period of time. That just helps no one.
That's good marriage advice, too.
Well,
relationships in general.
In all relationships, exactly right. You know, I make mistakes every day. And when I become conscious of a mistake, I do my best to say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. And if I have made the mistake verbally, I will apologize for it verbally. If I make the mistake in writing, I will apologize in writing. I always try to use the same context in which the error was made. If I make a mistake publicly, I will apologize publicly. But those are some practical tips I think that any leader at any role should keep in mind.
Yeah, definitely. Commissioner, thank you. A lot to digest here, and not a lot to be critical of, which is really nice.
Well, listen, I just want to thank you guys again. What you're doing in the Say Network podcast to strengthen the capabilities of our youth leaders around this territory is absolutely vital. If we don't have strong youth leaders, then we are not living up to what we should be as a Salvation Army, and we're not preparing for the future. We're not even doing a good job in the present. So I just want to thank the three of you and your entire team for what you're doing to build up youth ministries through this podcast.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your continued support for the circus we have down below your office. Well, thanks for being here. If you're listening and have questions or maybe need some advice on anything we've talked about, please reach out to us. You can send us a message on social media at Say Network or email us at sayconnect@gmail.com. Anything we've talked about in this episode will be linked in the show notes. And don't forget to subscribe to the Say Network podcast on iTunes for updates on new episodes. Thanks for listening. And on next week's episode, we're going to discuss the topic of why people start criticism with, you know what's funny, and it's never funny. When they start when it's funny, it's never funny.
Or I like how you.
Yeah, it's never I like that. We'll explore that a little bit. All right, goodbye, everybody.
See you guys.
Bye.